heard you say to some of your handlers that you are going to fight this decision.
Yeah.
What do you intend to do?
Just go the way other fighters fight their decisions, and they get turned around. I mean, this is it happened to me in the Trinidad fight, and I thought it was closer, and it happened to me here. I mean, Shane Mosley is a great fighter. He's a great person. He's a great all-around human being, and I give him all the credit in the world. He's one of the classiest acts in boxing.
Frazier! Down goes Frazier! Down goes Frazier!
And they got it back! This should be the round of the century.
Look at Holyfield! What a warrior!
If he weighs 205, his heart weighs about 204.
Can't believe it.
That was astonishing, and he hurts him with a hook. Corrales comes back a straight leg. Now Castillo against the ropes. Unbelievable. Epic flow. Corrales waiting. Castillo's in struggle. Leach steps in, and the fight is over. Corrales with a remarkable dramatic turnaround to win this fight.
If he gets up, he probably wins the fight. I can't believe it!
Unbelievable! Richard Steele stopped the fight with fewer than 5 seconds to go. You're going to watch Lou Duva go crazy now. You're going to watch Lou Duva go absolutely berserk.
Hello Boxing Asylum listeners, and welcome to another episode of Punches from the Past. I'm Steve Wellings. We have an excellent panel with us once again this evening. Dave Lee, Mr. Kurt Ward and Andy Patterson on the line. And we're going to discuss the rematch between Sugar Shane Mosley and Oscar De La Hoya that took place back in 2003 in the MGM Grand Las Vegas. If you listen to our previous show, you'll know that Sugar Shane obviously won the first fight. You'll be able to go back and listen to all our assessments and what we thought of that one. This one, I think it's fair to say, was a little bit more controversial, whereas most of us thought Mosley was a fair enough winner in the first fight. This one really did divide opinion, and most people thought that De La Hoya had managed to get his revenge. With 3 world titles on the line, the judges obviously thought that Sugar Shane had done enough.
Ladies and gentlemen, from the MGM Grand of Las Vegas, we go to the scorecards. All 3 judges, Dwayne Ford, Stanley Christodoulou, and Anek Hangtongkam, scored this contest 115 to 113 to the winner by unanimous decision and new super heavyweight champion of the world, Sugar Shane Mosley.
I repeat, I have seen stranger things.
It's terrible. Absolutely terrible.
Say it loud, George.
This is terrible.
So go back and watch this fight if you haven't watched it for a while. Guys, just going to throw my 2 pence worth in first of all. The 2 fighters were really coming into this in a much different space than they were after the first fight. Sugar Shane actually remarkably hadn't had a win in some 2 years. It dropped decisions. There were dubious things flying around about him regarding performance-enhancing drugs, and he wasn't really in a good place. And Oscar, on the other hand, like I said, Andy, we think he was just hard done to, and it was one of these decisions. After the fight, he said he wanted to get it reversed, which was never going to happen, but just leading into the fight before we get too much into it, I mean, where were the 2 fighters really sitting from your eyes?
Well, obviously, I think Shane, as you say, he had 2 fights, as we discussed in the first episode. Diaz, Taylor, and Stone. 3 fights. Then came the Forrest fight, especially the first one. I think as Kurt says in the first episode about Mosley's chin, everyone knows it's legendary, and it was really tested in that second round against Vernon Forrest. I think he was dropped twice. I know he was soundly beaten, but it was against a very, very good operator.
How did he get through that second round? Though? It's incredible.
It's unbelievable how he got through that. As you say, maybe mentally he was shot. Or confidence definitely rock bottom. This is the reason it took him many years afterwards to basically even admit to using PEDs. But in 2003, he finally admitted that he'd been using the cream and the clear, which is some sort of kind of steroid ointment, followed with some injections and some cream and stuff. Oscar, on the other hand, we know about him beat probably one of the greatest Spanish fighters of all time, Javier Castillo. But honestly, I think the fight against Fernando Vargas, even though he was doped up and stuff, that was obviously a great rivalry there. Tremendous knockout. And then obviously Uruguay Campas, who stopped with 7 rounds. Campas probably just, Campas, we know what he was about, but I just don't think he was good enough just to kind of get above the apex and get on to kind of really elite level. Then came the rematch. Obviously there was a lot of talk. Deadlines were set for the rematch. Mosley was holding out for more money. I think he'd end up settling for a $4.5 million purse. I think the way the money was getting split, especially with the pay-per-view buys, if he would earn additional money if the buys were over 600,000. I don't know what the official buys were, but the money was going to get broken down. De La Hoya had been promised a $500,000 bonus from his £12 million purse if Mosley had beat him. So obviously the official decision did come in. I don't know if he actually got paid that money. Mosley would also get a $2.5 million HBO fight, followed by a Bob Arum guaranteed $5 million pay-per-view fight. And if Mosley had lost the fight, actually HBO would still due him $500,000 comeback fight.
Dave, Sugar Shane fought 5 fighters twice throughout his career. De La Hoya was one of them. Back-to-back knockout wins over Fernando Vargas was another one. Back-to-back losses to Ronald Winky Wright, and 2 different times of his career wins over Ricardo Mayorga. But coming into this fight, the second fight with De La Hoya, it was the 2 losses to Vernon Forrest which had really knocked the shine off Mosley. Obviously he had trouble with him in the amateurs, but he looked like a fighter who we didn't think he could be dominated like that, but Forrest had really knocked the sheen off him when he came into this rematch with De La Hoya.
Absolutely. I mean, a lot had changed in the 3 years since they had previously fought. I mean, De La Hoya, you could argue he was in the form of his career, really. I mean, okay, the Castillo fight, he did what he had to do. It was a fairly dull points victory. But the Vargas fight was scintillating. Stopped him in 11 rounds. I thought he looked sensational that night. And, he looked to have kind of a new lease of life as well under Floyd Sr. Now, you can argue about the credentials of Floyd Sr., but I think what he did with Oscar was he kind of loosened De La Hoya up a lot. De La Hoya always had kind of like that tense, somewhat robotic style, and he was a lot looser under Floyd Sr. I suppose one of the drawbacks with that as well is he had more of a relaxed defense, and he was getting caught a lot more. I mean, Andy mentioned the Campas fight. I mean, Campas tagged him quite a bit early on. Now, Campas was never good enough to win that fight, but and maybe Oscar was a bit complacent. It was just a tune-up for the Mosley fight, perfectly honest. But Campas was catching him. It was funny as well, just on the Campas fight. I remember one of the selling points, because that actually wasn't pay-per-view, believe it or not, the Campas fight. One of the selling points of that one was Campas was drinking this magic potion in the gym, and it was going to help him to defeat Oscar. That's, believe it or not, that was one of their selling points.
The goblet, wasn't it? The mysterious goblet.
Was Panama Lewis in the camp by any chance?
We kept on calling it a goblin instead of a goblet. I remember on Sky.
Even Aaron got in the action. He says, I took a sip of that myself, and I could feel myself being revigorated. I was like,
you imagine that being said today? I mean,
Twitter would explode. Twitter would explode. But definitely the shine was taken off Mosley because previous to that he fought Raul Marquez, and that ended in a no contest after 3 rounds. He didn't look good in that fight. And actually, Marquez made somewhat of an interesting comment as well. I mean, he said that Mosley was fighting scared more, and to an extent, and not so much in the Marquez fight because we didn't really see enough of it. But we saw inklings of that in this fight. He definitely didn't have the same swagger and the same. Just overall confidence that he had when he was undefeated. I mean, that's to be expected. As you said, he was coming into the fight with he hadn't won a fight in 2 years. The first fight, I mean, okay, The second fight with Forrest was an absolute stinker. If any of you haven't watched it, don't. It's absolutely atrocious. But the first fight, I took it's just a terrible clash of styles in that one. But the first fight, Mosley took an awful shellacking. The second round, I think early in the second round it was a clash of heads, and I think that kind of threw Mosley off. But he took some punches in that fight, which he'd never taken before, and I think it was the first time he was dropped, amateur or pro, in the first Forrest fight. So, I mean, I don't think he'd even tasted his own blood prior to the first Forrest fight. So, everything that could have gone wrong for him went wrong in that Forrest fight, and it just completely knocked the confidence out of him for a couple of years. But prior to this fight as well, I remember the Mosley camp. They were trying to con people, saying that Mosley was faster than he was in his lightweight days. They were it's like they were trying to pump in this kind of like false confidence into Mosley. Just trying to G him up any way possible. But he didn't really get off to a good start. I gave Oscar the first 4 or 5 rounds. I don't know how you guys saw it, but for me, Mosley just didn't get off to a good start at all, and he just wasn't letting his hands go. I don't know what you guys thought of it.
He was wild as well. I think whenever he did let his hands go,
very wild. He was off balance, off target with that. Oscar was. The thing was, there wasn't a lot of action early on in this fight, but Oscar did seem to be controlling things from the outside. But at the same time, just to play devil's advocate, there wasn't a lot of action in the first 5-6 rounds, and Mosley was pot shotting. So we'll get into the judges' scorecards in a bit, but you could make an argument that Mosley could have stole a couple of those early rounds, and combined that with his later work. It might have swayed the judges somewhat. Interesting as well. Just thought I brought this up. Prior to the fight, the betting was interesting. Oscar was a solid betting favourite. I think he was like 5-2-1. Mosley 7-2 against, but the draw was only 10-1. I thought that was very interesting at the time, because normally, you get 25, 33-1 in the draw. I think it started at 18-1 and it came down to 10-1. So the bookies maybe they knew something. I don't know.
Maybe they did, Kurt, what Dave's alluding to there. If you type in De La Hoya Mosley 2 into Google, then the word fix appears next to it, and I know Dwayne Ford, a lot was levelled at him at the time. There was something a little bit murky around this fight, not said.
Yeah, the thing is, I'll get onto the scorecards, like you said, later, but I think going into the fight, Shane, HBO tried to, again, like I mentioned in the first episode, HBO were really up Oscar's ass, I thought, and he did a lot of good work in this fight. It was compared to the first fight, it's not exactly one you'll watch time and time again. It was a very tactical fight. Not a lot happened. The crowd were restless. They weren't very happy during a lot of the rounds, especially going off the first fight. It was such a great fight. But when you got two good fighters, as a boxing fan, I like that. The tactical battle. Both of them don't make a mistake. They're both trying to implement their game plans. But I just think for Oscar De La Hoya, this was the perfect chance to get revenge on Shane Mosley. Not only is Mosley a completely different fighter now, but he's also moving up in weight again to take on De La Hoya. I know he had a fight before, but De La Hoya again is the guy who's the more at the weight. He's had more fights and he's more, ready to fight at that weight. And I think Shane's gone up there to try and get that fight again, another big payday. But with Mosley in this fight, HBO again tried to make out, this wasn't a different Mosley, this was just a different De La Hoya. Floyd Sr. apparently worked wonders, and Oscar was a completely changed fighter. I didn't really see it. All I saw was for the first 6 rounds, he was pumping out a jab 30 times a round, and he didn't go after Mosley. I think, the Vernon Forrest fight showed, you could stick a jab in Mosley's face. Winky Wright showed it to perfection. Stick a jab in Mosley's face, and make it accurate and keep pumping it. Mosley's going to struggle with that, and especially when it's a good fighter doing it. But I just think HBO were really behind him straight away, and they were basically saying this Mosley. I think it's clear that Shane wasn't the same. I don't think it was just the loss to Vernon Forrest. I think it was that second round absolute beating he took at the hands of Forrest. I think Mosley said himself that before that fight he'd never ever been hurt, he'd never been down, in sparring bigger guys. He's a guy who fully believed in his chin, and I think in the first Oscar fight he knew he could take Oscar's power. But I think once Vernon Forrest, had him all over the place, and really, it's a miracle he got through that fight.
Forrest getting through with his long right
Oh,
hand.
he's got him with the right hand! Forrest, what about this? Mosley, shaken up! His gloves go down. Oh, a huge uppercut, another right hand! And he's down for the very first time in his life, amateur or pro. Mosley.
6, 7, 8. How you feel, kid?
We could have a huge upset here. Mosley could go, and it's only round 2. Has Forrest got him here for breakfast? This is incredible stuff. There's 20 seconds left in round 2. A dramatic round 2, and look at that again. Big right to the temple from Vernon Forrest. He's dangerous with that shot. Mosley sacked against the ropes and goes down on the floor again.
3, 4,
And it's going to be counted as a knockdown too.
6,
He's all but knocked down in the round, Mosley, and only he knows how he got through it. Just he doesn't know what corner he's going to.
He doesn't. He was all but out there. Terrible trouble.
Then he became vulnerable, in his own mind. He had doubts, and like I said, he wasn't a shot fighter, but I think he was mentally very, worried about being hurt by Oscar, especially moving up in weight, and he was just so tentative those first couple of rounds. I think there is a case for him stealing a couple of them rounds. I mean, I just looking at my notes that I took here, I think there's a case that he could have stole round 3 and round 5, but I've got no issue with someone giving Oscar the first 5 rounds. I think you could easily have him Oscar 5-0 up, but I think there's a couple of rounds there, especially when you're ringside. I don't see it as a fix. I just think, if Oscar's not doing much apart from throwing the odd jab, and you've got a guy coming forward, I don't think he was landing some good body shots now and again, but again, like Oscar in the first fight, he's spending too much time just standing there waiting for a big left hook or a big right hand. His dad was constantly telling him, stop waiting, use your feet, get close. But Oscar just completely changed. In the first fight, he was the one being the aggressor. In the second fight, he went on the back foot, went behind the jab. The first 3 rounds, I think Lampley, who loves his compy box, said he'd thrown about 90-odd jabs in the first 3 rounds, which, I think that's the perfect game plan. But as usual with Oscar, it starts to fade, and once he starts to fade, the jab seems to disappear, and once the jab disappears, a guy like Mosley, started to have more success, even though I only gave him 1 round in the fight where it was absolutely clear that he won the fight, that he won the round. I think there is a case that he could have not necessarily stolen, but taken a few rounds, basically because Oscar really could have stepped on the gas, but really didn't. I think he had a vulnerable fighter in front of him, a fighter who wasn't really sure what game plan to employ, was thrown off by Oscar's going on the back foot and jabbing, and was also in his back of his mind wary about taking big punches. And I think Oscar kind of blew it because there were just so many rounds where not much happened, and you think, well, I'll give it to Oscar, he landed a few jabs in that round, but just not a lot of action. And as usual with Oscar, I think he faded, and I think the last 4 rounds, there's a case to be made that Shane could have taken all 4, even though I didn't personally give him that. I think you could, and you only have to find 2 more rounds to get it a draw. I don't see how he could have won the fight, to be honest. I think that's too unfair on Oscar, but I can definitely see it's been a lot closer than the outrage that happened over it.
There was some out of... Sorry, Steve.
No, go ahead, Dave, go ahead.
Yeah, just to say, there was some out of character stuff from Mosley in the fight as well, wasn't there, Kurt? I mean, I think round 8 in particular, I mean, he was going in with the head a lot, he was pushing with the glove, stuff you wouldn't normally see from Mosley. I think that kind of indicated that...
caused the cut, wasn't it, though? That's what, a headbutt caused the cut.
The headbutt caused the cut. I think that was the 8th round jab, but I think it was just an indication of growing frustration from Mosley.
Desperation as well. He was just stalking, looking. He was like he was stalking, just looking for a big punch, as if he was like a monster puncher, and he just like he had no idea. He just thought, well, if I can land one, maybe I can hurt him.
He was erratic, wasn't he? I think I was going to make a similar point. He's very erratic, and even coming into the fight, I mean, like you said, Kurt, vulnerable would be a good word for him, because he just wasn't the same sort of guy. I mean, they'd put on the Raul Marquez fight that Dave mentioned, really, as a sort of unofficial eliminator. It was to ease him into the De La Hoya fight. They were hoping he was going to look good, and he didn't look good at all. He really stumbled over the line towards this fight. Mosley was not in a good place.
Absolutely, and Steve, you just mentioned there, I mean, he hit the nail on the head. He stumbled over that Marquez fight, and Andy mentioned it earlier on. I mean, it looked like at one stage Mosley was kind of pricing himself out of a Oscar De La Hoya rematch. I mean, he was getting, I think it was something like $4.2 million for the fight initially, but he demanded another 1.25 million, and Aaron basically told him where to go. I mean, and you have to be honest. Okay, Mosley won the first fight, but he was coming off the back of a no contest and two draws. I mean, a no contest and two bad defeats to Vernon Forrest. So where else was he going to get that kind of money?
Nowhere.
He actually priced himself out of a trilogy fight with De La Hoya as well. He wanted parity with De La Hoya, and obviously that was never going to happen. I mean, technically he won 2 decisions over De La Hoya, so in his mind he felt, well, I deserve the same as you. But obviously the second fight was controversial, and Mosley just wasn't on that level. And I think he took a massive pay cut to fight Winky Wright, I believe, and we all know what happened there.
Didn't De La Hoya have to add some kind of agreement, whereas there was money exchanging hands out of the purses for the victor? You know, the way I'll give you, say, is that how much it was?
500,000. Yeah,
500,000.
But to be fair though, it was a huge fight. I mean, just for people who may not have been around or may not have been following boxing at the time, this was a huge event in Vegas. I remember at the time, thousands of people around Vegas couldn't get into the fight, were priced out. And it was kind of similar deal to your Mayweather fights, your Pacquiao fights. There was thousands of people all around the strip watching in various closed circuit events. It had the feel of a really big event.
I'll just quickly give my take on the fight. I mean, as it says, I think I gave the first 4 rounds, it says, to Oscar. He just basically outboxed Shane. I think Shane did slightly hurt him in the first round, actually. But, I just thought De La Hoya's jab, boxing, movement and stuff like that, I thought he was pretty much on point. Shane would let his hand go from time to time. I just noticed here that it was actually the 4th round with the headbutts and stuff. That's when the cut was caused. We were kind of quiet in the 5th. But what I will say is actually, people will say that Oscar probably did tire late and stuff, but you need to remember, though, if you remember round 9, Oscar got hurt with a straight right hand to the pit of the stomach or in the ribcage, and he felt that shot because he backed off badly, and Shane was really trying to put it on him at that point, and he really did try and work the body. And if you look at the way the 10 started, it was quite quiet, and this is where it's kind of key on my scorecard, actually, because I did think that being a quiet round, you actually seen Joe Cortez telling them midway through that round, start fighting, come on guys, you need to start throwing punches here. And then Oscar kicked into gear in the last 30 seconds, I felt, and that was enough to kind of win the round. And I don't want to get Jim Lampley about it here, but if you just look at the punch stats, and if those are, say, even 90% accurate, then really Oscar should have walked away with his hand held there.
I think Shane got more desperate as the fight went on. His dad was really telling him, you need to do something now, and he really started working the body, and he was landing some good shots. I actually noted as well, the best punch in the fight I felt was Shane Mosley's right hand in the 12th round, which really caught Oscar well, and Oscar took it. I mean, obviously he took it really well as well, but it was a great shot and probably won, in a lot of people's mind, won him the round, and he closed it pretty well. The way we can tell from fighters who believe they're winning and who not. We mentioned before De La Hoya, Trinidad was a desperate man. He knew that he needed to really try and get the rounds in, or try and get a knockdown or a knockout. And I think in this fight you could see that Oscar knew that he probably banked a lot of the rounds, and Shane Mosley was like a deranged man, just swinging, going to the body, just trying to land big shots, because he knew that he had to do something. And his dad actually told him, for the last round, you need a knockout, you need to put this guy out, because he felt that he couldn't win the fight on points, and that's why I could see a draw in the fight, but I don't see a Mosley victory.
As a contrast as well, Floyd Senior, I think, told De La Hoya to go out and box in the 12th round, so that was where his head was at.
Yeah, no, I think that's right though from De La Hoya, because obviously from the Trinidad fight he would have known, no, I can't do that. Oscar tried to fight as well. I think that was right for him to do that, because just because Oscar De La Hoya has proven, you don't get a close decision all the time.
I thought he outworked De La Hoya in the last round though, Mosley. I give him the last round.
Especially as you say, Kurt, that right hand, a very, very long right hand, huge long right hand.
Really stunned Oscar.
Stuns De La Hoya. Hardest punch of the fight. Oscar seemingly trying to find his legs as he holds on again. Smart move. Hold on as much as you can.
But the repertoire between Jack Mosley and Shane Mosley, I didn't think was good all throughout the fight. I mean, there's a number of rounds there, especially at the end of the 6th round, where Jack Mosley's very downtrodden, and he's looking at Shane. He says, "Look, if you don't let your hands go, Shane, you're going to lose the fight." And that's not really great encouragement from towards Shane, really, is it? I mean, I don't know. I don't know at that point in time where the two of them were at. It didn't look like they had kind of a great relationship. Maybe I'm being too much into things, but
I think you're right, Dave. I think you're right.
Yeah.
Because in one of the rounds, I mean, he lands a body shot, good body shot, but I think Jack tells him, he almost quit that round. It was like just trying anything to try and get Shane thinking, oh, I was that close to quitting, getting him to quit, I've still got a chance then. And it was like he was saying things to him in between rounds, and at one point, even HBO picked up on it where Shane said, that won't work because, I can't do this because he's too quick, or, he questioned it, he said, I can't, there's no point doing that, it won't work, and he wasn't even believing the advice he was given. And it was only when I think the 9th round, which is the clearest round for Shane, obviously it's an easy round for him, I think that's only when himself it clicked that maybe I can win this fight, and that's when he really goes after the Hoya. And just, I don't know, he just like he needed that bit of confidence that he maybe could hurt De La Hoya, or get some confidence back himself that he hadn't had since the Vernon Forrest fights.
I think Jack was having a negative effect on Shane's career at this point, and especially even from the early rounds, like Dave said, he was very downbeat from a very early stage. I thought, and panicking almost a little bit too early.
That could be him just coming off the drugs, though, mate. Just him trying to kind of, basically withdrawal symptoms, basically.
Yeah,
very edgy.
Yeah.
But even in the 11th round, I mean, I thought Mosley nicked that round in the last minute, because I thought it was a fairly quiet round, especially for the first 2 minutes. And I thought Mosley came on strong the last minute, and I thought he shaded that round. But at the end of that round, which I had scored from Mosley, Jack Mosley was telling Shane, "You're letting Oscar steal all these rounds."
Shane, he's stealing the rounds from you. You have to jab him. You're not using your legs. We worked on that. You're not on your toes.
I mean, I don't know where Jack's mindset was coming from, but I think Shane needed a bit more encouragement to what he was getting at the corner, and a bit more tactical advice as well, to be quite honest with you.
I think he was trying to get Mosley to, you're letting him still around, you need to do something, giving him trying to get him to move into gear. But I just think at that point he just looked discouraged, and I think he needed to be told, you've done well that round, but you need to step it up. I just don't think he had that confidence. His dad, he needed something from his dad to say, you're doing all right here. That's a much better round, but he never really got it. Which from the trainer I can't really knock him, because they had a successful career up to that point, and he felt did what he felt best. But I thought, for the last few rounds, I did feel he was motivating Shane pretty well, and he was putting in his mind that he could do it, and it was only when Shane actually believed himself that he went for it.
The 9th round, as you mentioned, was a huge round for Mosley, wasn't it? I mean, that body shot really took the wind out of Oscar's sails. I mean, at one point in that round, Mosley was actually teeing off on Oscar De La Hoya. I mean, he couldn't miss with the shots. I mean, and it looked at that point that we were seeing a turn of the tide.
There's a big right hand by Shane Mosley. Oscar De La Hoya is hurt that time. Was he hurt from the low blow?
No. Right hand.
Shane Mosley is not even aware of it. Oscar with a look of urgency on his face as Mosley landed that last right to the body. The left hook lands.
But the 10th round, Mosley didn't really build on it, did he?
No,
I mean, I thought
quiet.
I thought Mosley was quiet, and when he did work, his work was very ragged. And I actually gave that round to De La Hoya.
Here's the thing as well, as again, as we mentioned in the first episode, there are people were actually questioning De La Hoya's stomach for a fight. As you say, he was badly hurt in the 9th round, but I felt he came back, even though it wasn't pure action. It was a very cagey fight. It was mainly fought in the centre of the ring and stuff. But if you look at rounds 10, 11, I think if you look at Oscar at times and stuff, he was willing to stand in there and let his hands go and fight back.
Yeah. Last round as well, as Kurt mentioned, he went out there, exchanging with Mosley. I mean, you can't question Oscar's inner steel. I mean, he's a proper fighter through and through, isn't he?
Yeah, and what I found interesting was, despite HBO, basically calling the fight an easy victory, at the end, Lederman only had it 115, 113, because he had Shane basically storming the last few rounds. And also, Lampley even, said that, I think in the 10th
CompuBox. Oh my God.
Yeah, he basically said though that if Shane took the last 3 rounds, he could see a conceivable way that he wins on the scorecards. Now, Larry Merchant disagreed, but I was actually surprised Lampley said that, and he was proven right.
He kept saying, I've seen Stranger over and over again, didn't he, before and after the scorecards?
His narrative really was, I think it was early in the fight anyway, it might have been slightly later in the fight, that he was forming his opinion as to why the judges would score it for Mosley rather than Oscar. And I was just like, but he was also making it was one of those fights the reason why I hated Lampley for a while, because he always formed an opinion mainly based on CompuBox.
Yeah, that was his job, I suppose, to spew them out. Kellerman does it a little bit as well.
CompuBox never tells you,
It doesn't mean anything, does it? I mean, someone can land 100 pity-pat punches, and one guy could land 10 absolute monster punches. I mean, what does it matter at the end of the day? I just don't trust them anyway. Some guy just pressing a button every time a punch, they think a punch lands, because we've seen many times, people at ringside can see a fight completely different to our people on TV. So how can you trust someone sitting at ringside? We know how fast some guys are, and they're punching. They can't be accurate. And to me, I don't think it. People who use these as a proof of a guy winning the fight. I mean, it's up there with people using, the guy had, a cut face as a reason why he lost the fight. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, CompuBox is, Kurt, it's a fun stat. It's fun to look at these stats, but to use them on the basis of someone winning a fight, absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, I think it was a fun stat, but now it's become very tired, especially when Lampley's using it still to this day, 2016, every single round. He had a good round, he landed 99 power shots to this guy's 4 power shots. I mean, and then it's like he's trying to brainwash the viewer into going how he wants it to be.
Yeah, saying, well, I'm not telling you what to think here, but just look at these stats, just saying.
No.
I'm not telling you what to think, but this guy is fighting this guy's fight. He's really, this is not his game plan. He's not comfortable. He was hurt by that. I hate when a commentator tells you a fighter was hurt when there's no, we know when a fighter's hurt. Sometimes a fighter hides it well as well. We don't know. But when you don't know it, and it's hard to say, I don't like someone telling me, that guy was hurt, because it's already trying to plant it in your mind. Let's score around to that guy then. He just hurt him. Well, what proof was there? He was firing back. He didn't show any feelings of being hurt. But it's just it's a bad habit a lot of them got, and it's not just HBO. We've had this guy for years.
Absolutely. Well, getting back to the scoring of this fight, I mean, I mentioned off air to you guys. I mean, this is my first time properly scoring this fight since probably the initial viewing of the fight, and I had this a lot closer than what I first had it. I only had Oscar De La Hoya winning 1-1-5, 1-1-3. I think the key is the first 6 rounds, isn't it? I mean, Oscar definitely got the better of the first half of the fight, but there was some rounds, as Kurt mentioned earlier on, where not a lot was happening. Now, the third round, I think Kurt flagged that as well. That's a round that could have been given for Mosley. Now, I gave it to Oscar, but De La Hoya was a bit negative in that round, and Mosley was finding home for a few right hands. So, if I'd given him that round, just for instance, and I'm playing devil's advocate here, I would have had it 1-1-4, 1-1-4, a draw. So it's just to give it another slant as well. But at the same time, to give it a draw or to give the fight to Mosley, you'd have to give the benefit of the doubt and all the close rounds to Mosley, and I don't think that's just either. I'm not sure how you guys feel about it.
I think with robberies, I mean, I think when you have a fight where others cries a robbery, I think when you watch a fight back, you can say, well, do you know what? For instance, in this fight, you could say, I think Oscar won the fight. I think he won 8 rounds. But how many rounds could you give Mosley? And I think there is quite a few rounds. I think, if you watch a fight and you say this guy clearly won 7 rounds, there's no way he didn't win these 7 rounds, everyone sees it, then it's a robbery, because the guy can't win unless he's dropped him a few times. But I think in a close fight like this, there is a lot of these fights where people claim robbery. You could see 6 rounds that, because a guy will always take the odd clear round, but there's rounds where not much happens, and it's just the way you view it. Some people have a personal bias because they like the particular fighter, or they don't like the particular fighter, and they can use it like that. But I think in this case, at the time, that you could see why. Like I say, if you just switched out to this fight and just watched it as a, on the sofa, just wanting to enjoy a fight, you'd say that's Oscar's fight there. He deserves the win. But when you actually sit down and score it, you could say, well, Mosley, they could be rounds. Mosley could be technically stealing.
Absolutely.
It doesn't seem like, You know, Mosley wouldn't have went home, I don't think, feeling like he deservedly won the fight. But, you know, and I think Oscar would have been obviously the more disappointed, but I think there could be a case, even though it doesn't seem right. That's just the way the sport and the rules are.
It seemed closer to me. It seemed closer to me this time, actually. I remember watching at the time on Sky. I remember Ian Dark was commentating 13 odd years ago, and I'd always had it in my head that it was a big robbery, and De La Hoya definitely won. I've revised my opinion slightly. I still think De La Hoya won the fight, but it did seem closer this time upon revision, actually sitting down and watching it and analysing it. I did feel it was a closer fight, and if you're scoring a 115, 113, in my book, there's always the avenue for, well, I suppose, you know, in a fight like that in the first 6 rounds, you could swing back. It takes a stretch for me, but I could see maybe it wasn't. But the fact that all 3 judges had it all scored exactly more or less the same way, the same scores, you know, I mean, afterwards, my old friend George Foreman said, that's absolutely terrible. This is not what you want boxing to be. But it didn't feel like that sort of outrage for some reason this time round.
Well, also, Steve, consensus ringside scoring had Mosley winning 16-8. So,
really?
You know, that's another side of the coin, you know. So the ringside reporter 16 had him winning.
I think that's the problem with a guy who's basically working behind a jab, and it's not, you know, it's not a ramrod jab. It's just a jab to keep the guy off, keep the distance. And the other guy's, you know, landing body shots. He's coming forward. He's swinging. There's one guy looking like he's desperate for the win, especially in the later rounds, and one guy who looks like he's using a jab to just try and, you know, get through the rounds. And, you know, it's hard to say, but at ringside, you know, Mosley's the guy who's looking forward. I mean, like I said, I don't see how Mosley won the fight. I don't think he deserved to win the fight, but I can definitely see him stealing the draw. I can see that, but I felt that Oscar deserved the nod in this one, to be honest.
What about you, Andy? How did you score it?
I had it 116, 112 to Oscar. Now, as I say, I gave you the wrong. I had it 117, 111 initially, but when I was reading my notes and I checked my scorecard app on my phone, I'd actually accidentally gave the 12 to Oscar. Obviously, I told Mosley won the 12, obviously. Just double check the notes. As I said, I think early doors, Oscar was basically the boss. Probably just kind of took the 5th round off, but I did think he'd come back and win the 6th and 7th. The 8th and 9th were clear Mosley rounds, especially the 9th. As I say, the 10th and 11th, I think that Oscar really does show, you know, he was a fighting man. He did have that inner steel. He was willing to go places and stuff, but he got badly rocked or stunned by that long right hand off Mosley, which I gave a 10th to Mosley. So 116, 112 my scorecard for Oscar. I couldn't get it any closer than that. So I can't really see. One thing I would like to know, Steve, is I know how you mentioned there about Dwayne Ford. You know, Dwayne Ford had it 150, 113 to Mosley. I did notice after the fight, Mark Ratner, who was the Nevada commissioner at the time, says they're honest men and they scored the fight the way they did. To me, there is no controversy. So just wondering, you know, what do you know about Dwayne Ford back in that time?
Was there not some whole fuss afterwards? Was Bob Arum's offices not raided or something, and there was a whole big scandal on the back of this? Am I right? The FBI, did they not get involved at some point? Was it this fight or was it a different one? I can't back that up, guys, unless you lot can remember.
I'll need to go and check that one out. I remember now the FBI being involved, but I don't know if it was this fight or no.
I think the Dwayne Ford thing was just conjecture off the record. I don't think anything on the record was ever levelled at Dwayne.
Yeah.
I mean, there wasn't an investigation into this fight, though, was there? I know Oscar called for one, but I don't think there was.
Was it not mentioned in some kind of investigation later on down the line?
I can't really remember.
I'll see if I can find it.
Wasn't that for the Balco thing, though? Mosley being on the cream and the clear, was that not investigation?
Quite possibly. I could be getting mixed up. If guys are listening and they can remember, then please let us know.
I mean, the only high-profile fight around that time, would have been a couple of years earlier, that they had investigation was the Foreman Briggs fight. I mean, I know that was subject to an investigation, but I don't think there was an actual investigation carried out in the Mosley De La Hoya rematch.
In this fight, though, what a comment that I found interesting was Merchant at the start when he said,
when they met 3 years ago, there were young lions fighting for local pride in Los Angeles. Now they are mature lions fighting for survival.
These guys looking like they come to the end of their careers, and, you know, they see what will happen after this fight. And it's interesting, 2004, you know, Mosley would lose twice to Winky Wright. The first fight really dominantly lost, and De La Hoya would have a really, really poor performance against Felix Sturm, and everyone knows Sturm deserved the win in that fight. And he would perform pretty well against Bernard Hopkins, to be fair, before getting stopped with that body shot that we all know. So it was a true point about survival. Even though Oscar De La Hoya was still in obviously massive fights, and Shane Mosley would still get good wins. This was probably them at the last time they were at their best, I'd say, or supposedly the best.
Well, as you mentioned in the last, sorry, David, as Kurt was mentioning actually in the last episode, I had the box recs up in front of me. These were the golden days. I mean, from that 2000 to 2004 period, you've got De La Hoya fighting Mosley twice. He fights Gatti, as Andy said, Castillejo. I mean, Castillejo wasn't great, but as an interim fight, pretty damn good. He settles the score with Vargas, fights Sturm, and then goes on to fight Hopkins. Whereas Mosley, he also has the 2 fights with De La Hoya, 2 fights with Vernon Forrest, 2 fights with Ronald Winky Wright. I mean, this was the time, really was a very good era for boxing.
And he still went up and beat a prime, probably Antonio Margarito, pushed Cotto close as well. Cotto was always like, he would always gas late, especially at welterweight and stuff. But you would probably say at that time, that was when Cotto was at his absolute peak, at his prime, until, the dawn of Mexican boxing beat it out of him. But, glorious fight. And then obviously the Shane Mosley, the Floyd Mayweather fight, but obviously he was meant to fight Berto. The tragedy happened in Haiti, so he was out the ring for the best part of 14 months. So all the momentum he had off that Margarito victory was lost going into that Mayweather fight.
And he still, gave all boxing fans a huge, what the fuck moment when he badly hurt Floyd Mayweather, during that second round. So, like you said, it was a shame that he couldn't get that fight off the back of Margarito, because after that, the momentum was really with him. And I maintain it. I think he would have did a job on Andre Berto, who's, I've always said was overrated, and maybe he could have done a bit more. But you can't really see him ever beating Floyd Mayweather, to be fair. But it was a shame he couldn't get that big fight straight off the back of that brilliant performance against Margarito.
Well, the fight was on the table for Mosley, the Mayweather fight in 2006, wasn't it? After the second Vargas fight, I think like the November date that Mayweather eventually fought Valdemar on, that was there for Mosley, but I don't think he wanted it. I think he was asked about it. He was asked about it in the post-fight interview with after the Vargas, and he said something like, "I need a vacation," and he mentioned something as well, which kind of came back to haunt him on the forums at least, was my tooth's a bit loose, and I need to get it fixed with the dentist.
I have nothing else to add before we close out, guys. So if you do, then jump in now.
We'll give our scores. I think Andy gave his score already. Did Kurt give his score?
Yeah, I draw.
Mine was the same as yours, Dave. I think 115, 113.
115, 113. I think the only round myself and Andy disagree on is the 11th round. Now, I initially scored that for De La Hoya. I'm pretty sure I did, but this time I gave it to Mosley. I just think in the last minute, I thought Mosley just stole it. I thought the first 2 rounds were a bit too quiet. I thought 2 of them kind of nullified each other.
But they both had their successes, though. I really did think Mosley was landing some heavy shots, but Oscar rallied as well,
Yeah.
I don't know. I suppose you pay the money, you take your choice. I suppose it's what you like at the end of the day.
As I said, the first time I gave it to De La Hoya, and this time I gave it to Mosley. It just goes to show, the whole subjectivity of scoring.
Okay, guys, thanks very much. If you haven't watched the Oscar De La Hoya Shane Mosley rematch, I'd encourage you to do so. Go off and find it on YouTube. It's definitely there. And let us know what you thought over on Twitter. Tell us how you scored it, what your thoughts were watching the fight in retrospect. And obviously you listen to this on iTunes, so please drop us a rating and review. And also, if you have any recommendations for any future fights that you would want covered on this series, on this show, then get in touch and we'll definitely consider them. We're open to considerations and offers, and we want to look at plenty more fights, even going back into the distant past as well. Give us a shout up on Facebook as well. We'll obviously post all the links there, and on the regular forums and stuff. If you have any requests or any recommendations, we're open to listening to that, guys. I've been Steve Wellings, and thanks to Andy Patterson, Kurt Ward and Dave Lee for jumping on with me as well. And we'll catch you in another episode of Punches from the Past. Thanks, guys.